Today's story, we have a terrible tragedy that befell a young man in the upper New York wilderness, and it eventually led to the largest search and rescue ever organized in New York's history. But before we get started, we tell stories that depict violent and potentially scary situations. Viewer discretion is advised. If you like our stories, please consider the like and subscribe buttons below, and also turn on notifications to never miss out on our new videos. In the summer of 1971, 8-year-old Douglas Legg was enjoying the break between his 3rd and 4th grade years at school. Dougie, as his family would call him, was a keen outdoorsman. He would love going hiking and camping and fishing with his dad and extended families. They had a seasonal retreat that they would go to every year. Dougie's family was very financially well-to-do. His mother was the co-founder of the Melvin & Melvin law firm in Syracuse, New York, and his grandparents were very wealthy through other various business endeavors. Several decades prior, Robert Pruin was a prominent businessman as well, and a banker from the Albany, New York area. He purchased a plot of land from a local town of Newcomb in the late 1800s, and he was known to cater to some very distinguished guests. In fact, he had Vice President Theodore Roosevelt vacationing at the estate when President McKinley had an assassination attempt on his life. He then rushed back to be sworn in as the new president of the United States. In 1953, Pruin would go on to sell the property to the Melvin family, which is Dougie's grandparents on his mother's side, and the property would be used to host family vacations and get-togethers every year. The getaway retreat was the Santanoni Preserve, which was this gorgeous 13,000-acre wilderness. It was located just south of the Adirondack High Peaks. And when you enter the preserve, you enter it on the southern side through the city of Newcomb, and you cross over the Newcomb Lake Bridge, where once you enter the preserve, you're greeted by this beautiful 130-year-old log cabin. It has a drive-through stone arch. It's referred to as the Gate Lodge Complex. Another 4.6 miles down the crushed stone road, you would come to the Newcomb Lake and the crown jewel of the entire preserve, which was the main lodge. It was an even more elaborate building with an overlooking view of the lake. And in total, there were 45 buildings on the property, all comprised of the same beautiful wood and stone architecture from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Dougie and his entire extended family were enjoying one last vacation that year. The preserve had to then be shut down for the winter, and Dougie had to go back to school in Baldwinsville. Dougie woke up on July 10th extremely excited. He had made plans that afternoon to hike the preserve with his uncle. Dougie loved hiking, so he got dressed in his favorite shorts, threw on a t-shirt, ate breakfast, and then he started working on some chores around the house just to make sure that everything was kept up, and he was anxiously awaiting, though, that afternoon hike with his uncle. The time would come, and Dougie and his uncle would set off down the trail. Dougie had a hiking stick in his hand and a huge smile on his face. After about 20 minutes into the hike, though, his uncle noticed poison ivy on the side of the trail. Not wanting the boy to touch it, he sent him back to the cabin to change into his pants. Dougie fought with him, saying that he'd be fine, he won't touch it, he'll walk over it, maybe he'll use a stick to push it down. Either way, his uncle won and sent him back to the cabin. So he made the half-mile trek back to the cabin, and he passed his brother and cousin about 50 to 60 yards away from the main lodge cabin itself, while his uncle would wait for him at the end of the trail where they were previously at. He knew the trip should take about 30 minutes round trip. That time would come and go, though. 30 would pass and then another 15, and Dougie was still not back, so his uncle set out back for the main cabin, figuring he'd probably run into him on the trail back to him. And when he arrived at the main lodge, he didn't see Dougie anywhere. So he started asking some of the other family members, "Have you seen him? Have you seen him?" His brother and cousin were the only two to acknowledge, "Yes, I saw him about 50 to 60 yards away from the building, maybe 20 or 30 minutes ago." Then he stepped inside the main cabin and saw that Dougie's pants, the one that he should have been changing into, were there in his room. So that made him very concerned that Dougie didn't make it back to the main lodge. He got all the family members together and they set up their own search party. which throughout the night they would search the area immediately surrounding the cabin, figuring he couldn't have gone far. It was only about 30 minutes ago. That evening, though, after they exhausted all of their efforts locally, they reached out to the state police and brought in local townspeople to try to help together this search party and find Dougie. The following morning, the forest rangers had arrived, and they had rescue dogs and helicopters would be circling the area looking for him. And the Plattsburgh Air Force Base actually sent out planes with a new technology called FLIR, which is a camera system designed to pick up the heat signature of a person. If you shine it out into the wilderness, you'll see an orange and yellow silhouette of a person or something with heat, like an animal, and everything around it will be a colder bluish temperature. All told, there were 1,000 volunteers scouring the Santanini Preserve. But the combination of harsh terrain, boglands, steep hills, and heavy rains caused the searches to go extremely slow. But in one moment, the family had hope. The bloodhounds picked up on Dougie's trail, and they tracked it through the woods to a swampy pond. There, they called out a team to drain the pond and dredge the bottom, potentially looking for any clues or Dougie himself. Then again, on the 5th day, they found shoe imprints that belonged to the 8-year-old out near Ward Pond, which was maybe a mile and a half around the northern side of the lake. But after walking the area with the bloodhounds for hours, they were unable to pick up his scent trail. It was most likely washed away from the rain. After a week of unsuccessful searching, the family reached out and chartered a private plane to pick up a team of elite rescue mountain men from the Sierra Madre Mountains. And the team was brought in to check the area, but unfortunately they were unfamiliar with marshland type areas, and they had heavy tree cover. They were not familiar with the northern New York wilderness at all, and eventually they met the same outcome of not finding anything related to Dougie. And eventually, after a 6-week search with heavy rains, an elite search team, and at times sub-freezing temperatures at night, the search for Dougie was called off 1 month prior to his 9th birthday. One of the oddities that I found with this case is that a search party with bloodhounds had picked up on Dougie's trail at one point. Not the one that went into the marshlands, but another one that went up into the mountains. And they tracked it for a long way. They actually ended up tracking it for 30 miles. And the handlers thought there's no way that this is possible and tried to actually pull the dogs off the trail. But they would go right back to the trail saying, no, this is accurate. This is where he went. We smell him in this direction. But the end of that 30-mile trail just kind of slowly dissolved into nothing and they lost it. So nothing ever came of that search. There had been sightings and significant findings reported in years following Dougie's disappearance. In 1973, a hunter was on military leave and he came across a skull and human remains. But he was not supposed to be in that area, whether it was for trespassing or he was on military leave to a different location. So he was concerned that he would get in trouble and did not report it. 20 years later, though, he would come forth in 1993 and tell local authorities what he found. When they followed up on his lead, they weren't able to find anything at the location that they gave him. There have also been several reportings of bones from hikers and divers, but they all turned out to be animal remains. Some of the questions that came to me while I was researching this topic was, why did the uncle wait for Dougie? Why didn't he just go with him back to the main cabin to change out into his pants? This was an 8-year-old boy. I don't know many people. Now, I get that it's 1971, but I don't know many people that would trust an 8-year-old to walk a half a mile through bear-infested country. Another question was, why didn't the family hire this search and rescue expert team from the Sierra Madres? Why didn't they bring them in earlier? They waited a week. If it was freezing temperatures at night, then Dougie probably had already expired by that point. So it would have been better to bring them in, especially if they were financially well-to-do, brought that team in very early in the search process. They could have saved his life. Unfortunately, that's all we know of Dougie Legg. He would be 59 years old this year. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider the like and follow buttons below. I'm also active on TikTok as Mr. No Sleep TV. And thank you all very much for your support. We will see you for the next story.